When I was a kid growing up, probably my best subject in school was math. I don't know why I got it very early on. I was known in school for being very good with math. I was in the elite math class in all of high school. And then even as a kid, even in elementary school, it was just, I'd literally go an entire school year without making a mistake. Like I liked numbers. I like numbers now. So, today we're going to do a little math. We're going to crunch the numbers. We're going to punish the numbers. So let's get it. All right, so the first place I want to start with breaking down the numbers in this video is we're going to start with Worldometers. Okay, so we're going to go to the Worldometers website, and the first thing you're going to see is the COVID deaths this year. Okay, so COVID deaths this year, as of December 7th, 2020, okay? So COVID deaths this year is 1,541,641. Okay, that's COVID deaths this year in 2020. Now, take that with a grain of salt. Okay, we know that the deaths are being inflated. I've talked about this so many times now. They are being extremely liberal and loose with how they are counting these deaths. Everything that has an association with COVID, they're counting it as a COVID death. Okay, so the numbers are probably much lower than this. Okay, they guaranteed they are. Anybody with a COVID positive test is getting counted as a COVID death, even if the coronavirus had nothing to do with it. Even if the test happened long ago, long after they recovered, this is, and they never got sick from it, they'll count it. They'll count it even without a positive test. At times they'll count it if they think that the symptoms matched. Okay, so there's a lot of things happening to inflate these numbers, but these are the numbers that we have according to Worldometers. So we'll take the numbers with a grain of salt, but we'll use the data that we have. Okay, so the first thing that I want to call attention to is I want to compare deaths by COVID to the total deaths this year. Okay, so total deaths this year as of December 7th, 2020, when I took this screenshot, was 54,919,887. Okay, so 1,541,641 comes from COVID. Okay, let's take that number with a grain of salt. So that's the comparison. Okay, deaths by COVID to total deaths this year. Okay, so let's break that down for a second. If we divide 1,541,641, which is the COVID death count, into the total death counts of 54,919,887, that is 0.028. Okay, or 2.8%. So not a whole huge number there. Okay, less than 3% of all of the death this year worldwide is by COVID. Okay, now again, I'm gonna bring this up again because I think it needs to be addressed. Okay, this 1.5 million deaths worldwide is an inflated number. It is, okay? We know that the CDC reported for the U.S. that only 6% of the deaths in America are COVID-19 alone, okay? And I did an estimate before that estimate came out. I did an estimate going off of Italy's numbers, which is 12%, okay? In Italy, obviously the news never told you any of this. They don't cover this. They don't talk about it. So Italy went back and looked at all of their deaths. They decided, after looking through all the actual information, that only about 12% of those deaths were actually because of COVID-19. If we apply that statistic to what's going on in the States. The official count in the United States is 177,000. If we were to take 12% of that death count now, death by COVID, is 21,000. Fine, let's double it, okay? Just to give them the benefit of the doubt, that number becomes 42,000. So we're gonna try and put this into perspective a little bit, okay? So let's do that, okay? Let's make it a fair range, okay? I'm gonna say between 12 and 24% of the COVID deaths this year are legitimately by COVID. I think that's very fair. I think that's actually probably too much credit to the virus. Okay, but we're going to do it anyways, just to show you what the numbers really should look like. Okay, so if we take the 1,541,641 COVID deaths this year, and we take that down to 12%, we're only at 185,000. Okay, now if we double that, okay, I said I'd go a range from 12 to 24%. Then we double it, we're looking at 370,000. Okay, so somewhere between 185,000 and 370,000 people worldwide have died by this virus in the whole world. Okay, now if we apply those numbers, let's go with the big number. Okay, we'll go, just to be super fair, okay, we'll say that 24% of those COVID deaths are legitimately by COVID, so 370,000 deaths. If we take now 370,000 deaths and we divide that into the total deaths this year of 54,919,887, now you're left with just 0.67%. Okay, so 0.67% of all death, that's 2/3 of 1%. Okay, less than 1% of all the death in the world was by this virus. Okay, so remember, all the things we have done this year, all the things we have put people through, all the change, all the devastation economically, all the emotional distress, the despair, all this for something that has only contributed to 2/3 of 1% of the total deaths worldwide. I'd also like to point out this statistic that's been staring you in the face the entire time I've been talking here, which is net population growth this year. Okay, net population growth this year is 75,896,581. Okay, so almost 76 million people, net population growth. That means that almost 76 million more people roam the earth now than before. Okay, what that means is 76 million more people were born than died this year. Okay, so this is during a global pandemic, the most dangerous, deadly virus of all time, and yet we're 76 million people larger than we were last year. So let's talk about the cases for a little bit, since that's the big buzzword on the news all the time, always talking about cases. So here we have coronavirus cases according to Worldometers, 67,386,262 as of December 7th, 2020. Okay, so over 67 million cases of coronavirus. Okay, when you look at under the food section of Worldometers, it shows you that you have undernourished people who are in the 847 million, okay, or obese people in the world. Obesity is a pretty deadly thing that's killing lots of people every year. There are 771 million cases of obesity in the world, okay? So obesity and undernourished people there are more than 10 times the cases of that all over the world, but we don't seem to be making that much of a priority. What if we put the amount of energy into changing the entire world for obesity or for malnourished people? Okay, we don't do that. Or how about this? We've got 795 million people. Okay, almost we're approaching 1 billion people with no access to safe drinking water. Okay, that's a lot more people suffering in the world as a result of not having access to a simple thing like safe drinking water. Okay, by comparison to the coronavirus cases, I think we have a much bigger problem with this. And this could have been solved a long time ago. This has been a problem in the world for a very long time. Okay, and let's not kid ourselves. We all know that the 67 million coronavirus cases is an inflated number. Okay, all the discussion there is about these faulty PCR tests, and they're getting all these false positives. So we know this. Okay, even as inflated as this number is, it can't compare to some of these other real world problems. But again, you need to understand this. What's going on right now, where you live, around the world, this is not about health. If it was, they would take extreme measures like this a long time ago to save people from these other things. It's not about your health. This is a control play. They are using this virus as an excuse to impose their will on you. That's really what this is. So let's come back to deaths here for a second. So we've got, for flu deaths, we've got 457,000 deaths. So that's not as high as COVID, right? That's only about 1/3. Although if you take that number and compare it to the true COVID deaths that we calculated a little bit earlier in this video, which was 185 to 370,000 COVID deaths, then actually the flu has been deadlier than COVID has. Okay, and let's not forget about the fact that we know that the flu's magically disappeared this winter. Okay, we have all seen the reports about how flu cases have virtually disappeared. And we know why, okay? Flu cases and flu deaths are getting lumped into the COVID category, so that explains that. And what about HIV? Okay, we look at the death caused by HIV. That number is even higher than the death caused by coronavirus, okay? At 1.5 million, just a little bit higher than the coronavirus deaths. Okay, and when we look at the infections too, the infections of HIV is lower, although quite high than coronavirus. It's lower, so that should be a big problem, don't you think? I mean, it's a lot harder to spread HIV than it is to spread coronavirus, and yet look at the cases. They're quite high and the deaths are even higher. So I would suggest that based on these numbers, our global handling of HIV is pretty abysmal, since we're letting this thing, which is much, much harder to spread, get around and kill people all over the place at a similar rate to the COVID. And of course, down at the bottom, we've got deaths caused by cancer this year. Okay, so it's 7.6 million deaths by cancer this year. That's 5 times higher than the deaths from COVID, okay? And that's the official COVID, the inflated COVID, okay? Still 5 times higher death by cancer, okay? But we don't turn the world upside down for all the death that cancer is causing. We don't, okay? In fact, quite the opposite, okay? There are people who can't get into hospitals for surgeries and screenings for their cancer because we're too busy dealing with this COVID problem. So that seems not very intelligent to be prioritizing COVID over cancer when the death is higher in cancer. By the way, how long have we had cancer as a problem in humanity here? A pretty long time. Okay, isn't it interesting that although we've had cancer for years and years and decades, and at a higher mortality rate than this virus, And that's always been acceptable to us. We have not put the whole world together to try and come up with a cure for this, okay? Like we have for this virus, okay? We've, for decades, had cancer, and we've just allowed that to be a problem in our lives. And though this virus, we were able to come up with a vaccine for it in less than a year. Let's compare the coronavirus in the United States with cancer in the United States. Okay, so in the US, we've got 15 million cases of COVID-19. And we have 288,000 deaths by COVID-19. Okay, if you believe those numbers, we're going to go with the data we have. Okay. I suspect, as I say, that those numbers are heavily inflated, but let's use those numbers for the time being. Okay, in cancer, we have 1.8 million new cancer cases in 2020 and a death count of 606,520 by cancer in 2020. Although new cancer cases are much lower in 2020 than COVID cases, the deaths are quite a bit higher, okay? So if we take these figures and compare how many cases of COVID wind up turning into deaths by COVID, and you compare that to the number of cases of cancer turning into deaths by cancer, we see that cancer is quite a bit more deadly here in the States, okay? So you see that 33.7% of cancer cases is death, okay? Whereas COVID-19, we have 1.9%. According to Worldometers, deaths caused by smoking this year is 4,667,798. That's compared to the 1.5 million of COVID deaths. That's 3 times higher, okay? But that doesn't seem to be a problem worth tackling at the way we're tackling coronavirus. It actually blows my mind that of everything that's gone on in this crazy year we call 2020, that we have not had anyone outlaw smoking. During the pandemic of a respiratory illness that affects the lungs, okay? But smoking has not been outlawed. We continue to have it, even though the deaths by smoking still appear to be 3 times higher, 3 times deadlier than coronavirus, okay? But that's okay. You know, you can smoke. I see videos online all the time about people who are not wearing the mask getting bullied and harassed by very belligerent people just because they're not wearing a mask. I don't see any videos of anyone who's really concerned with health and this respiratory issue. No one's harassing smokers, okay? You can have somebody, as long as they've got their mask pulled down under their chin so that they can smoke a cigarette, then that person's a hero because they wear a mask. Even alcohol is deadlier than COVID-19 is, okay? As you can see, 2.3 million deaths globally caused by alcohol this year compared to the 1.5 million of coronavirus, okay? So, like smoking, nobody's outlawed alcohol even though it's deadlier. In fact, not only is it not outlawed, liquor stores are an essential service virtually anywhere you go, okay? This is one of the businesses that can remain opened. We have businesses all over the place that are suffering severely from the lockdowns. People can't run their businesses, like gyms of all places that promote health. But a liquor store, that's an essential service. It's essential because it's killed 2.3 million people this year alone. Did you know that the CDC has graphics up on their website showing you all the ways that alcohol can kill you? Here's my favorite. Drinking any kind of alcohol can contribute to cancers of the mouth and throat, the larynx, the esophagus, the colon and rectum, the liver, and the breast. So just to recap, drinking alcohol kills more people across the globe in 2020 than COVID-19 does. And cancer kills a lot more people than COVID-19 does in 2020. And alcohol helps cause cancer. So together, they're much, much deadlier than COVID-19. I wonder how many people out there who shame people for not wearing masks because of how they could be killing people with COVID-19. I wonder how many of those people have been drinking their faces off all year, probably to excess, and probably more than any other year before. According to Worldometers, road traffic accident fatalities is at 1.2 million this year in 2020. Compared to the 1.5 million deaths by COVID-19, they're pretty comparable. And actually, if you compare the road traffic accident fatalities to the true COVID-19 deaths, as we're estimating at 185 to 370,000 deaths, then road traffic accident fatalities are much, much higher. So actually, every time you get into your car and turn the ignition, you have a higher chance of dying than you do of getting COVID-19. Okay, but when you go into your car and you turn the ignition, your stress level is probably at a 1 out of 10. When you go to the grocery store and you see someone who's not wearing a mask, your anxiety is probably at a 10 out of 10. Okay, so we've been doing a lot of numbers. We've been doing a lot of global numbers. We've been doing some US numbers, okay? But now I want to take you to some stuff about Canada, and I think it's going to blow your mind. So let's have a look at this. So there's this really great tool at Stats Canada, okay? And I'll provide the link so that you can go here and you can do the things that I'm about to show you, okay? Because I really think this is going to blow your mind a little bit. Okay, but you can go here and you can have a look at what death counts look like weekly in Canada using this tool. Okay, so when you arrive at this website, okay, and you can see this graph, and each color line represents a different year. Okay, so you can see these represent weekly deaths in Canada. Okay, all ages and both sexes. Okay, so each line representing a different year. You can sort of see the legends down below. 2014 is blue, 2015 is orange, okay, and so on. 2020 being the black dotted line. Okay, so you can see that in Canada, you know, you can clearly see the irregularity, okay? You can see that somewhere around March, the deaths started to climb, and they kind of peaked up in April, and then they started to come down, although they were still much higher than normal. Okay, so it is very clear from this graph that something abnormal happened at that time. Okay, and it's most likely this virus. Okay, we got hit with the virus around this time, and people who were unprepared, and we didn't know quite how to treat people with this, and so we had a number of deaths. Okay, so you can see that very clearly here. Now you can see very clearly on this graph, okay, in our country, that right around the end of May, the panic is over. Okay, from that point on, we're not seeing anything abnormal happen. Okay, from end of May, we're back into very normal death as compared to all the other years, as you can see from the cluster of lines, okay? And in fact, if you have a look, once we get to about September, I mean, look what's going on. We're seeing the 2020 deaths plummet, okay? It's come down so low that it is the lowest death count weekly in our country's recent history, okay? That's September of this year in Canada. Okay, so understand, have a look around right now. Okay, I understand that this line ends in September, okay? And so we don't have the data yet for October, November, and December. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see how those numbers look, okay? But here we're seeing a downswing that in September we're at the lowest we've been in years. And we are adding restrictions, and we're doing mask mandates, and we're doing all these things. And ever since then, it's been continuously more tight restrictions. Now, there's something else here that I think is worth noting, okay? Because if we look at 2020's peak here in April, we're at above 6,500 deaths in a week, okay? So that's high, okay? And it is. You can see the abnormality on this graph, okay? That's high. But look at this purple line at the far top left, okay? Purple, if we look at our legend, that's 2018. In 2018, we had deaths in the 6,500 and up in January. Okay? So what was going on there? And how come nobody was panicking there? See, you have to understand something. The media was not covering this. They were not telling you every day of your life, every hour of the day, that there was something super deadly out there happening. Okay, so you had no idea. You had no idea that there was anything killing people in January of 2018, so you weren't scared. You would never even know that there was anything out there killing all these people because the news didn't cover it. But it was there, it happened, and we got through it. Okay, and it's not just there. Even that red line in the top left, red line is 2017 in January. It's, halfway between 6,000 and 6,500. Okay, even if you come to the very far right side of this graph, so end of December on the blue line, which is 2016, we're above 6,000, reaching 6,500 almost. Okay, so these numbers have happened before. We've had these great rises in death. And we never made a big news story out of it, never created this mass hysteria about it. And if I didn't show you this graph, you'd never know that there were deaths happening in a week that were comparable to the absolute peak of death in 2020 surrounding COVID-19. So a cool thing about this tool that you can do is you can actually adjust for different criteria. Okay, so as you can see here, now I've changed the graph and I've changed it to only people who are 85 years old and over. Okay, so this is obviously our most vulnerable demographic. So I wanted to kind of see what that would look like. And as you can see, the graph is very similar. Okay, so when we're talking about strictly our danger zone, population, 85 years and older, we get a very similar look. We have this kind of abnormal high in April where it comes up, but then it comes down. And even as we get down to September here, we start approaching very peak low death. Okay, and then we can see that, in things like January of 2018, the height of death was very comparable to the height of death here in 2020. So a lot of the same things we're seeing by just toggling to 85 years and over. Now, watch what happens when I change the age at time of death to be in the demographic of 45 to 64 years old. Watch what happens. Now look how different this graph looks all of a sudden. Now, the one thing that is consistent with the other graphs is that we see the death rate drop dramatically once we get to August and September again, okay? But in this demographic across Canada, 45 to 64 years old, this has not been an abnormal year, okay? You can see that it's got some ups and downs, but nothing out of the ordinary. Okay, if you didn't know about COVID-19, if that was never brought to your attention, then you just looked at this graph, the only thing that would be out of place would be the huge drop in 2020 in August and September. But there's nothing about this graph that shows an overwhelmingly bizarrely high amount of death in 2020. Okay, and 45 to 64 years old is still, it's not old, but it's in a higher category. Certainly at the high end of that, 64 years old is not young anymore. Okay, and we're not seeing anything out of the ordinary. And you have people from 45 to 64 years old that are still working, that are still trying to earn a living, that are still trying to provide for their families and their loved ones. Okay, and so these are the people that are having to suffer through lockdowns. These are the ones who are having to compromise and that are losing their wealth, they're losing their livelihood. Okay, and these are not the people who are gaining anything from this, because they're not dying in any sort of strange way, as you can see by this graph. It's another way that you can change the criteria on graphing this is you can change the geography. You can look at this by province. Okay, so here I've brought up Quebec. Okay, Quebec got hit pretty hard early on with this, and so we can see a similar graph again. Okay, so we get this abnormal spike in March and April, but then from June onwards there's really nothing out of the ordinary happening. Okay, from really end of May to early June onwards, we're in a normal place. Okay, but Quebec has had some of the earliest and most draconian measures since then. Okay, but there's nothing in this graph, in the deaths, that's showing me that this is necessary. Okay, we are in a very normal place here in Quebec. So in this graph, we're looking at Ontario. Okay, this is where Emperor Crazy Doug Ford runs the show. Okay, so we see again in March and April, we have that abnormal spike. Okay, so this is obviously getting hit with the coronavirus. Okay, but then, come late May, that we're in a place where we're back to normal. Okay, back to normal. And as you can see in this graph, I mean, my goodness, crazy Doug Ford here, just losing his mind. Okay, he's arresting Adam Skelly from Adamson Barbecue because this guy wants to open his damn restaurant. Okay, look at this graph. Look at it. Okay, you get down to not even August. We're still in July, and he's already having record lows of death in his province. Okay, this is Ontario. Look how low it is by the time it gets to September. I mean, it's crazy how safe this province is. And yet they are acting like they gotta send in the military to stop people from living. It's unbelievable. All right, let's have a look at Alberta. So this is where I live, and I think it's actually really interesting what's going on in this province. Okay, so here, this graph looks kind of different. Okay, you can see that in February, March, kind of where you would expect that the COVID virus would have hit. It is a little bit higher, and it's kind of plateaus for a little while over there. So that kind of makes sense, okay? You can see that it's a little higher than the rest of the years, and it doesn't go up and down. But you'll notice that for Alberta here, the highest death count is not even in 2020, okay? It's in 2018. In early January of 2018 is the highest weekly death we've seen in this province in recent memory, okay? And that 2020 does have some high points, okay? That's for sure. You can see that as you come later on into, say, June, July, August, that it is not obscenely high, but it is higher a little bit than what we would have seen in previous years, okay? Which is interesting to me. You'll also notice that if you go back to January of this year, that's where the actual highest point of death was for Alberta. So, we're told that we did not get really any cases here until I think February or March, where we started to actually see cases of COVID-19 in Alberta. So what was that? What's happening in January where we have that's the highest point of death that we've seen this year? Did we already start getting the virus, or was that something else that was going on there? We don't know. Okay, but I do find that kind of interesting. Okay, so in this chart, we're still in Alberta, okay? But now I'm going to start looking at different age groups, okay? Because I think you're going to start to see how interesting this gets. Okay, so still in Alberta here. And we can see the spike in February, March, and into April even, let's say, with the 85 years and older group. Okay, this is what we're looking at with this chart, 85 years and older. So that's our most vulnerable demographic, right? Our oldest people. And we can see clearly that in that time period that things were at their highest for 2020. But outside of that, and even if you include that, there's nothing obscenely crazy going on here in 2020 for our most vulnerable people. Okay, in fact, you'll see that there are many other points looking at this graph that people who are 85 years and older have had the same or worse weekly deaths. Okay, we go in 2018, the purple line right at the beginning on the left-hand side in January is very high, okay, compared to anything we've seen in 2020. We can go on the far right in the red line, 2017, and all the way up, okay? You can also see this brown line, which is 2019, on around October in the 41, 42, 43, 44 weeks, where it's very high over there as well. Okay, so we can see looking at this that although we had some, high death in 2020 during March, that really, if you look at this chart, you wouldn't really see anything that looked abnormal or out of place. So if there is death happening a little bit higher this year in Alberta, and it's not really showing in the 85 years and over age group, then where is it? So let's have a look. Okay, so now I've dropped it down to 45 to 64 years old, okay? And still, we look at this graph, and there's nothing abnormal happening here, okay? You can see that while there have been a couple spikes in 2020 around end of May and end of August, they were very short-lived. They're just these quick spikes. They're nothing super out of the ordinary. We've also seen spikes that high in the orange line, 2015, around middle July and middle of November. Okay, as well as in 2017, the red line, if you look at kind of beginning of November. Okay, so really, you look at this graph, this is the 45 to 64 years old age group in Alberta. And looking at this, you would not have any clue that there was this scary, dangerous pandemic happening. Okay, everything looks very normal. So let's have a look at the next age group, because I think this is what's going to really open your eyes. Okay, so now I've taken us to 0 to 44 years old. Okay, this chart represents young people. Okay, and so this pisses me off. Okay, and it should piss you off as well. Okay, now we see what's really going on here. We can see in 2020 where the excess death is happening. Okay, you can see it. It's very clear. I don't have to explain it to you, but I'm going to say it anyways. You can see that right around early May onward, there is higher death in Alberta than normal, and it's among the young. Okay, from May onward, we're talking about spring and summer on. In young people, we're seeing death. Okay, so you need to put this into perspective. Okay, we know a couple of things. We know that the peak of death from this virus happened early. We saw it in all the charts. Okay, that in February, March, That's when the virus hit. That's when we were not prepared. That's when we didn't know how to treat it. That's when we made our mistakes. And that's where death happened because of the virus. Okay, but we're looking at 0 to 44 years old. This is young people. We all know that young people are not at risk from this virus. This spike in death from young people is not because of the virus. It's not because of that. Okay, and the timing doesn't work either. We're talking about spring and summer, where the bulk of this death in this age group is happening. So what's happening? Okay, now I don't have a concrete 100% proof of this, but it's common sense. Okay, if we have young people and it's from spring forward, then it has to do with the government response. Okay, it's lockdown, it's depression, it's stuff like that. This is not the virus that's causing the death in Alberta. Okay, this is where I live. This is where people, friends of mine who are going to be watching this video, live. Okay, this is not because of the virus. This is the government. Their response has been absolutely devastating to Albertans. Okay, so here we're seeing a similar thing with BC, okay? BC, you have your spike in March, okay? Like we've seen very consistently, where the virus is doing its damage, okay? And although even here, you can see again, at the top end of death in 2020, in March, is not the highest point on this graph at all. Okay, we can see that all the way back in 2017, the red line in January is quite significantly higher than that. Okay, but we did not have the widespread panic that we're having right now. Okay, but anyways, we can see that there's the COVID spike in the early part in March of 2020, and then everything kind of normalizes until about July. And then we can see clearly that 2020's death count is a little higher in July and forward from there, okay, than other years. Now, is this because of the virus? No, it's not. We know this, okay? We know that the COVID deaths spiked early on in March, and then they kind of leveled off. They did, okay? Cases have gone up because of various reasons, okay, that we've talked about before. But COVID deaths have not spiked in July, okay? So why is there all this extra death in BC? Well, it's not because of the virus, okay? It's because of the government response, because of lockdown, it's because of depression. We know, we've seen, how many articles have you seen about BC and suicides jumping up over there and people's mental health? Okay, this is what it is. The virus is not the problem. It's the response, okay? It is the lockdowns. This is what's destroying our lives. And guess what? The long-term effects of this are going to be even worse if we don't stop doing this and start turning this around. So despite everything we're seeing in the numbers and the graphs and all the information that I've been showing it, we continue to restrict and lock down. Even when we have the WHO telling us not to lock down, we see our leaders don't care. They're just going to do what they want to do because they have a different agenda. Okay, we're seeing it now. Alberta, where I live, we've been delaying this longer than anybody else, but it just happened. They just announced that they're going to go into the full lockdown like everybody else is going, where now they're closing the gyms, they're closing the restaurants, limiting how many people can be together, okay, essentially canceling Christmas, all this stuff, right? So let's have a look, because I want to show you something about gyms. So here's an article out of Men's Health magazine. The title says, "New study shows how likely or unlikely you are to catch coronavirus at the gym." Okay, and it says researchers analyzed more than 62 million gym visits from 14 European countries and found that just 487 infections had been reported by operators. The article says, there's been a lot of talk about whether gyms should stay open or be forced to close while the world is dealing with the coronavirus pandemic. but a new study has suggested that gyms throughout Europe pose an extremely low risk of infection and should be kept open for the health and well-being of their communities. Having analyzed more than 62 million gym visits from 14 European countries since September, researchers at Sheffield Hallam University discovered that just 487 infections had been reported by operators, which works out to a rate of 0.78 cases per 100,000 visits. Okay, so that means that you have to have 100,000 visits to gyms to get one potential infection. Okay, that's what that's saying. 0.78. It's not even one. Okay, but 100,000 gym visits is going to equal one infection. And we're closing the gyms for this. Okay, we're closing them. So Doug Ford can come on and do a press conference and bring his expert, or Jason Kenney can have a press conference and bring his expert. I don't care who it is. They can bring their experts and they can propagandize you information and data to try and justify all the stuff that they're doing. Okay, but they can't justify this, and they won't even take questions on this. They won't address this. Okay, the fact is that gyms are not spreading this. It's clear by this study. We're talking about 14 countries in Europe, and you have to get 100,000 people to visit a gym before there's an infection. I mean, how do you even argue this? You can't, and that's why they don't. They don't take questions. They don't do debates. They couldn't win a debate if they got into one. Okay? It's easy to talk and say your piece when you're talking to an audience that just has to listen and nobody gets to challenge you. Okay? And then when you control who's asking the questions and what kind of answers you can give. This is all theater. We can't even give the gyms the option now to work at 15% capacity, 25% capacity. Why? You have no data whatsoever to tell us that this is coming from the gyms, that it's coming from the restaurants. Why it can't pass at a Costco where it's full of people, or a Walmart, or whatever it is, okay? The double standards suck. I told you before, we talked about liquor stores, alcohol. This is an essential service, guys. It's causing cancer. It's killing more people than the stupid coronavirus is. Okay, but they're not closed. They can operate. Okay, you have to wake up. It is not about health. It isn't, because none of this stuff makes sense. All right, so I'm going to wrap this up here, but before I do, I just want to say that I have create an account on Parler. So if you're not familiar with Parler, it's kind of a social media alternative. There's some parallels with Twitter. It's kind of different. But anyways, it's a censor-free social media platform. And I encourage you to go on there if you don't have an account yet, because this whole Facebook, Instagram, YouTube garbage, it's getting worse by the day. There's rumors that they're going to be changing their guidelines some more to make it even worse. I think that I'm probably going to wind up getting off of these altogether. I'm already off Facebook, obviously, as you know. I'm still working on getting my stuff back. I'll keep you guys posted on that. There's some other stuff that I've come across that I'm going to try here. But even Instagram, first of all, I don't have much of a reach on here because I had to restart all over again. But yeah, I think the experience is just going to get worse and worse. So I'm going to start focusing a little bit more on Parler and trying to build a following there. I encourage you to come on there and find me there and look for my stuff there. I'll keep using Instagram for now. But as I say, there may come a point where I just get off the thing because of how it continues to change, and it's just going to get worse and worse. So that's it. I just kind of wanted to notify you that I'm on that. Come check it out. And that's it. I hope that you found this video useful. I really wanted to crunch the numbers and squash the BS. Like, there's lots of it, okay? Stats don't lie. It's the person wielding the stats that lies, okay? And I wanted to show you some stuff that you're not seeing, and I hope you took away something from that. So stay tuned, and I'll have some other stuff coming up soon. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed that and want to see more, hit that like button and feel free to leave a comment and tell me what you think. This content can be found on BitChute, Parler, Instagram, and YouTube. So please follow, subscribe, and turn post notifications on so that you know when the next post drops. Thanks, and see you soon.